Okay, this is a book review, and the book is John Alegro, The End of the Road. So let's just read a little bit from it. This book is a companion volume to The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, describing the author's outstanding researches into the origins of Judaism and Christianity. In The End of the Road, which is every bit as revolutionary as its predecessor, Mr. Allegro explores the shattering implications of his theory that Christianity springs directly from an ancient Near Eastern fertility cult. Early on in his researches, Mr. Allegro became aware that the results they promised must extend in significance far beyond a resound historical appreciation of the beginnings of Judaism and Christianity. For good or ill, Western man has come to look on the Old and New Testaments as divinely inspired source books of moral teachings. When it began to appear that much of what Judaism and Christianity was imagined to be was based on a radical misunderstanding, not only was their religious dogma called into question, but also the validity of their moral teaching over the centuries. In particular, the New Testament Gospels came to be seen as containing no universal precepts of love and forgiveness, but cryptic expressions of incantations and beliefs concerned with a mystery cult involving the worship and eating of sacred fungus, the Animatus muscaria. The psychedelic properties of its drug had for thousands of years persuaded the initiates of the cult that they possessed special divine powers of perception and a source of superhuman strength. In the light of Mr. Allegro's theory, the Bible and the Church have suddenly lost their claim to moral leadership, and the Christian flock is left without a shepherd, just at a time when a host of new moral and social problems have plunged mankind into deeper uncertainty than ever. So, where are we? We're at the end of the road with John Alegro, and the reason that I'm saying read this book is because I've read this book. It's short. It's got big words, not big words, no, it's got small words and large lettering, and it's in hardback, but I mean, this is probably very rare and hard to find. So let's carry on. In economics, social ethics, art, sex, the teaching of children, war, and other fields, Mr. Allegro examines the dilemmas into which man's scientific advances are forcing him. Mr. Allegro concludes by wondering whether the concepts of man's relationship with nature that were embodied in some of the more sophisticated cults of the ancient world might not, even in the 20th century, offer us a sound pragmatic philosophy, which to wield the power of life and death so long ascribed to God and now thrust into mortal hands by the new technology. John Alegro was born in 1923. After taking a BA in Oriental Studies and an MA at Manchester University, he spent a year researching in Hebrew dialects. Whole year. At Oxford, before being appointed a lecturer in comparative Semitic theology at Manchester University. He subsequently lectured in Old Testament and intertestamental studies, residing in March 1970. Then he took up a full-time research and writing, and when he wrote this book he lived in the Isle of Man. As you can see, John Alegro was a very clever man, and he was appointed by the Church, the Pope, the Roman Catholic Church, to be on the team deciphering the Dead Sea Scrolls. And what he found is in his books. But because what he found didn't suit the church, they totally poo-pooed his work, trashed his reputation, and took none of his facts as evidence. And so the rest of the scholarly world followed suit, because no one wanted to stand up and say Jesus was a magic mushroom. That is funny, especially when we've had all these years of conditioning that Jesus was a man, and to find out that he never was a man, that he was a magic mushroom, it's almost like too much. So this came out in the 70s. It was in the national newspapers in England in the 70s about John Allegro's findings, but also he was trashed by the other scholars, trashed by the church. Surely now is the time to wake up and say, well, in actual fact, this is proof, this is scientific evidence about the origins of these religions. The good thing about this book by John Alegro, The End of the Road, is that for someone like me, I'm not a learned scholar or anywhere near someone that took exams at school. I'm pretty rubbish at spelling and reading and writing, but it doesn't mean that I can't read. And this book is a lot easier to read than most of the books John Allegro's ever written, because he's talking to the layman in layman's terms. He's making predictions. He's writing this book in, I don't know, the 60s or something. I think he wrote it, I don't know, 60s or 70s he wrote this book. And at that time he was making predictions about the church and the state of the world through its religious beliefs, that actually he's no longer with us today, he's not alive, but the predictions he made have basically come true in some places, in some areas. So, The End of the Road, John Alegro, very good book, much easier to read than The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, or even The Christian Myth, because those books have got a lot of meat and potatoes about the actual language and the words, and this leads to that, and it shows you how, if you can keep up with it. Whereas this book just outlines his findings, and then he talks about how that's going to affect the world in the future.